both candidates, State Assemblyman Ed Ra and his challenger, Attorney Gary Port, to our town hall on the Assembly District, the 19th District race. My name is Steve Blank. I'm the editor and publisher of Blank Slate Media. And I'm here with one of our reporters, one of our excellent reporters, Ra Pelez. And we're going to have a discussion on the issues on the 19th Assembly District. So let me open up and allowing you guys to have 3-minute opening statements. And I would like you to know that I'm very punctual. So we've had some issues with the national debates. And the good news here is nobody is preventing me from shutting off your mic.
I was just going to say that you have a mute function on that. That would have worked very well in those debates.
Button here, so this is I don't expect to have to use it, but I can if I need to. So I hope you'll be better behaved than some of our national leaders.
That's the problem, Steve.
So Gary, why don't we let you get started in terms of your opening comments. Let me give you 3 minutes, and we'll start now.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. My name is Gary Port. I'm running for the 19th Assembly District as a Democrat. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel. I'm a small business owner. I was also a visiting assistant professor at Hofstra Law School, where I set up the free Hofstra Law School Veterans Law Clinic. I've worked with the State of New York Division of Human Rights on veterans issues. I'm the past chairman of the Nassau County Veterans Committee. I'm on the New York State Bar Association Veterans Committee. I'm also a member of the Association of the United States Army, the American Legion. Veterans issues obviously are very close to my heart. But the most important thing I want to talk about tonight is the fact that we're in a whole different world. What has happened in the last few months has dramatically changed pretty much everything. I have not seen an economic crisis like this in my lifetime, and this includes the Great Recession, the stagnation of the 1970s, the 1982 recession. We are going off an economic cliff. It was recently reported that 36% decline of economic activity in New York. I know personally, as a small business owner, I have employees. If it hadn't been for the stimulus package, I might not still be in business, but I was able to, every 2 weeks, pay my employees, even though we didn't have them on premises. And this is an important point. If we don't protect the small businesses, if we don't protect the workers, we're going to have a true economic apocalypse. Right now, we cannot expect any help on the national level. We have seen that there is nothing but gridlock there. What we have seen, though, on the local level is when New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut formed a regional alliance, we got COVID down to under 1% when the president of the United States basically said, good luck, guys, you're on your own. We need to do something similar to that on an economic basis. This is desperate times, and they call for truly heroic measures. We need to get the regional states working together on an economic plan. Now, some things we have to consider. During this crisis, when people are worrying about getting evicted, and thankfully, the New York State did stop evictions, we had to worry about people losing their homes on foreclosures. Foreclosures were stopped. But during this time, when people who used to think themselves as middle class were going to food banks, the billionaires earned another $875 billion. And let me repeat that. We're good Long Islanders who were doing steady work, steady paychecks, middle class, going to food banks. The billionaires made $875 billion. This is a problem. What I propose is, again, a regional alliance. We have to do a targeted, short-term, billionaire tax, and the money would not go to the general fund. It would go to COVID relief. It would go to small businesses to keep them going. It would go towards the workers who either they're underemployed or they're out of work. My wife was
Okay,
working.
Gary, we're gonna revisit that. We'll come back to that. Your 3 minutes are up. We'll
Okay,
let
great.
Assemblyman Ra to give his opening statements.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for the forum this evening. Thank you to Mr. Port for participating. I think by virtue of the screens we are looking at and anybody watching is looking at is a reminder of the different times that we find ourselves in. And as we try to move forward from this, obviously we are in the midst of a very polarizing election, but at the end of the day, we have some major challenges ahead. And in New York State, that's represented by a major budget shortfall that has been projected to be upwards of about $14 billion, in excess of $14 billion. Now, in order to do the things that we have come accustomed to doing in New York State, like supporting our schools, like supporting our hospitals, like supporting local infrastructure, we're going to have to make some very difficult choices. None of the options are all that great. We do continue to hope for some help from the federal level, which we did get some from the CARES Act. And I think one of the things that we need in the legislature is some transparency as to how that money is being allocated. Not all of it has been allocated, and yet we're talking about how much more we're going to get. We don't know. But in order to move forward and make sure we're funding our schools, make sure that we can provide for all those other needs, we are going to have to make some difficult decisions. We also need to look at the policies that have come about on the state level. There have been policies predating this situation that have come about that I think are not good for the suburbs. We had, the bail reform legislation last year that I think caused some problems. We made some good changes to it this year. We still did not restore any real judicial discretion. That still needs to happen. And we also have to stop the cost shifts to our local governments. If we help our local small businesses recover, and we have proposed some measures to do that, we need that in order to have our local economy rebound. The county has suffered tremendous losses in sales tax revenue. The state is not going to be in a position, obviously, to directly help them. So we need to get creative. We need to repurpose things that we've done in the past, that we've spent on our state economic development programs that too often have become grounds for corruption and haven't produced results. And we need to refocus our priorities onto what is really important for our state. And I look forward to discussing many of those issues this evening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me give a question for both of you. It's kind of the thing that's we're dominating here. Let's let me ask you a question. How do you think that Governor Cuomo did or has done in responding to the COVID crisis? We've heard about, it's been referenced in the national debate about New York, about the number of deaths, on how New York is and New Jersey is distorting the number. Ed, can you give us your assessment of how the governor, and then Gary, I'll let you follow and give yours.
Sure. So as we got into this at a time when I think, people were scared, they still are. People were looking for, some reassurance. And I think certainly the governor going out there on a day-to-day basis, having briefings, being open and transparent with the public about what the numbers were, both, daily, regionally, all of that, what was going on, what plans we were making to address things like hospital capacity, personal protective equipment, I think was very reassuring to people. And I think he did show strong leadership in that regard. But there are things also that haven't gone as well. I think the nursing home order, which has been oft criticized, obviously was, a disaster that led to many deaths. I think that the transparency has been very lacking there, as we haven't gotten the accurate information, and we're counting those statistics differently than most other states in terms of counting how many people did die in the nursing homes. There are people still looking for answers to those questions. And as I said, on the economic side of things, we need some transparency so that the legislature can be an equal partner in trying to work on the budgetary situation. We need to know how the federal dollars that came through the CARES Act are being allocated. We need to know how the $4.5 billion in short-term borrowing that the state went out for is being utilized within the context of the budget, so that we can be part of that. So the governor did certainly take advantage of the latitude he had to provide leadership on a day-to-day basis, but I think he could have done better by being more collaborative with the legislature and a lot of the decisions that have been made.
Okay, Gary, your appraisal?
Well, I think the governor was blindsided like the rest of us. As we now know, COVID went from China to Italy, but it also started circulating in the United States. There's now stories when they're looking at some of the lab results and autopsies that COVID starts circulating in the United States as early as November. But because the federal government had fallen down, the federal government, which is the clearinghouse for all this information, fell down. Cuomo, like the other governors, were blindsided. In fact, no one truly understood what was going on because of this lack of information at the federal level. To give a point, a week before the shutdown, I was in Albany. Hell, I was up there with Ed. We were up there. I brought some military people up there to show them around and introduce them to some of the legislators. That was a week before the shutdown. And the Capitol was packed. There were tons of people. The floor was packed. There were groups all over the place. And no one was really talking about it or thinking about it because, again, at the national level, the information was not being pushed down because, as we now know from the Woodward interviews, that Trump wanted to not panic people. So Cuomo was definitely behind the curve when this started. There's no question about it. And Cuomo himself admitted that there were mistakes made. But once he recognized where the faults were, where the problems were, he acted very quickly and very decisively. I think the mark of a really good leader is, one, to recognize what you don't know, get the right information, recognize when you've made mistakes, fix those mistakes, move forward, and don't get your ego involved. And then Cuomo had those incredible briefings where it wasn't the Andrew Cuomo show. It was Governor Cuomo telling us what was going on, letting us know what's going on, and then planning and working with the other governors, as I said in my opening, so that we are now down to under 1%. Now, my opponent is talking about it would have been great if he did more collaboration with the legislature, but part of the problem is when this hit, it hit so fast, so hard, that things just went off the rails very quickly. And Governor Cuomo acted very quickly, and he acted very decisively. We can Monday morning quarterback this all we want, but at the end of the day, very few people in this country acted with such dispatch as Cuomo, and very few people, and we're talking about New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, got it down to 1%.
All right, let me ask you, and I'll ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Gary, because you touched on it. And let's expand the question a little bit, which is, how do you think, let's talk about the federal government and President Trump, and how much is this race here? This is a state race for a state assembly in Nassau County, but how much of an imprint does this national race with President Trump have in a divided country? Gary, why don't you assess the job and the impact in this race?
Absolutely. If you would ask me this question 4 years ago, I'd say, hey, the feds are the feds and the state's the state. Yeah, there's some interaction, but they're not really that related to each other. Now, my take is completely different. I think all races are critically important because this isn't an issue of, like my opponent, I can argue about taxes, okay? That's a Democrat-Republican issue regarding taxes, regarding how we do education. All that are policy questions. But what has happened with Trump is he's taken policy out and he's turned the Republican Party into the party of Trump. And I'm a retired Army officer. On December 23rd, 1986, I took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution with my life. That was my oath. And even though I'm retired, that oath stays until I die. I am appalled by what the president has done to the Republican Party. We need a healthy two-party system. We don't have that right now. The Republican Party has abdicated everything that they believed in to support a man who is an open racist, who is a sociopathic narcissist, who has laid this country open to, just domestically with the COVID, his international relations are even worse. Had we had better communications with our allies, maybe we could have better communications on COVID. We have reached a point where he has even said that he might not even honor the election. So we have coming to a point that it's not Democrat versus Republican right now. And this is what even former Republican strategists are saying now. The Lincoln Project, Wilson, and folks like that. Do you support the Constitution or do you not? The only way that the Republican Party can find its soul again is to purge itself of QAnon, to purge itself of the racist, to purge itself of the dog whistle that Trump keeps blowing in order to basically turn people against each other. And every Republican who does not come out and say what the president said about the Proud Boys is wrong, what the president said about not accepting the election is wrong. Instead, what we get very placid comments. The governor of the Republican governor of Massachusetts.
Gary, we could do a show on Trump.
Okay, sorry, I apologize.
Let Ed get a chance to address the question of, number one, how the president, how he's handled this, and in terms of what his assessment on the race, whether this is a factor in what people are going to bring to when they go to the polls.
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, for starters, just in terms of the handling of the situation, right? I mean, we go back to early on when the CARES Act was passed, and obviously did a lot of good things. And despite its faults, even my opponent said, those things like PPP and the loans and things like that were lifelines to a lot of businesses. So, they did come together at the time and pass some aid that was very helpful to businesses, to the states, to local governments. I think if you remember early on in a lot of those briefings, the president and the governor were working well together. They were working on securing supplies together. They were working on getting New York enough ventilators, which was obviously one of the biggest concerns we had, was that we were going to run out of ventilators. And then they even had several meetings where they were talking about, what they were going to do going forward in terms of trying to work on the stimulus and all of that. And unfortunately, as we've gotten further into the political calendar, a lot of those talks have broken down. And look, I blame both sides for that. Both sides were trying to put policy issues into these bills that didn't belong there, instead of focusing on having targeted relief for our small businesses, for our individual taxpayers, for our local governments and state governments. But I think at the end of the day, I look at this as somebody who has sat in the legislature the last 2 years, where we became a single party state. And I've seen less transparency in our budget process and bill process than I ever have before. And I think that it has not been a productive thing. I've seen shifts in aid that were coming to our local governments from the state get pushed onto the county.
Address some of the budget things, but the point is your assessment of President Trump's response to COVID and the impact on the race.
Well, I think at the end of the day,
from the get-go. We knew about this in January.
This is a race about the state legislature. I mean, obviously, in any presidential election year, the person at the top of the ticket is going to have an impact down ballot. I think that is obvious. That's what most people are going to be paying attention to, especially during these times when it's harder to get, for people aren't really out as much and everything else.
Are you supporting President Trump?
I will be voting for him, yes.
You'll be voting for him. Do you think that he represents the Republican Party well? Are you pleased with his representation as the standard bearer of the Republican Party?
I don't share the way he conducts himself often. That is not how I prefer to conduct myself in terms of, just the way, in terms of attacking people and all of that. But I think, unfortunately, we've gotten to a point on both sides that, things have gotten very personal and the rhetoric has been dialed up, unfortunately, on both sides. So I don't think that's conducive to having good, well-informed policy discussions, which I think are the way that you really wade through the disagreement and really come to understand where there's areas of agreement. And that's something I think I know very well from my years in the state legislature. I've served in, other than my first term, I've served in essentially a body that was a supermajority Democratic. And I've had a lot of opportunities to sit down with colleagues on the other side of the aisle and have discussions about issues. And you find a lot more common ground than you do if you just go in and look at it as a D versus R thing.
So let's take it in terms of budget, in terms of the impact. Now, New York State is, you mentioned it's $14.5 billion loss of revenue for the coming year. States, as opposed to the federal government, must have a balanced budget at the end of the year, or at least in the budget. But right now you're in it. There's this situation where they're discussing now the legislation that's before Congress. The Democrats had come up with 4 months ago, $3.2 trillion budget, which seems to be in keeping with what economists said, that we need to go big. I think the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell, said the same thing. Republicans were opposed. There was discussion about not wanting to bail out badly run states like Democratic states. So what is it? Number one, before the state finalize this thing, there is the whole question of aid to states and municipalities, whether that money is going to be forthcoming, and if it's going to be forthcoming, and when. So, Gary, you want to discuss in terms of the impact, what happens, what do you think happens if the federal government doesn't come up with aid to municipalities? Let's look at the government budget. Let's look at the state budget. If the federal government does not provide money to the state of New York and the other states, what's going to be the impact? And if it does provide the aid that has been discussed, let's say best case scenario that the Democrats were looking for about $1 trillion, what's the impact there?
It's going to be, it's basically the nightmare scenario, Steve, because the problem that we have, again, when we're looking at an economy, we're not looking at, a chain. We're looking at an interconnected mesh. And when you start removing links from the mesh, it starts to fall apart. And I mentioned some of them. The small business owner goes under, okay? He's not paying his rent. He's not paying his utilities. He's not paying his employees. He's not paying his vendors. That cascades. The employees have lost their job. They can't pay their recurrent bills. They can't go out and buy. The vendors, they've got to then reduce their workforce because they've lost their customers. So you have this cascading effect. So if you can't start supporting the consumer and the business, you're going to have this massive cascading effect. And then with the municipalities, everyone's talking about they want their services. And let's talk about what those services are. some of them are critically important, such as Medicaid. If Medicaid goes under, that's going to create untold horrors in a pandemic. We have social workers. We've seen in this pandemic all this mental illness problem coming up. It will be a catastrophe if we don't get the money. And, it's sort of axiomatic that for God knows how many years, New York sends billions more to DC than DC sends back to New York. And so now, when we're in this situation saying we want more money because we need it, and by the way, we have given you guys so much more money, the federal government, particularly under Trump, is basically saying, hey, I don't want to give it to you. Mr. I only paid $750 a few years on my taxes, doesn't want to give money back, which isn't even his money, to help us. And if New York goes under, New York is the economic hub of this country. New York goes under, it is going to have a cascading effect on the rest of the country. And that forecloses even talking about the fact that these other states are having their own problem. We're at the leading edge. We're the canary in the coal mine. Okay, it is going to get worse for each other state. And what I said before, I can't trust the federal government. But if each state starts doing their own, I'm going to do my own tax policy stuff. We're going to have a hodgepodge of tax policy, no unified economic plan for the country, which is going to create more problems. So at least until the feds get their act together, which I hope they finally do, we need to start doing regional plans. If the Northeast or the Eastern Seaboard can work together on a coherent economic plan, then perhaps we can forestall some of this. And if we don't get the money from the federal government, which I'm really not counting on, we have to come up with other ways to do it. I did.
Give me some of those ideas. We had a discussion with 3 experts on this last week. Give me a couple of things that you think that should.
Okay. I'll tell you one that scares me. Okay. People on the far left are saying something Cuomo is saying no to. They want to tax the New York Stock Exchange. That one I think is wrong on a state level, because if New York taxes the stock exchange leaves. They've been saying that since the 1970s when New York was looking at that during the default crisis. So and I use that as an example because if you start having these hodgepodge of raising taxes or not raising taxes at different levels in different places, then you're going to have this very uneven flow. So first off, we have to get an economic regional council together of the states to work together of what they're going to do together. It isn't just New York or Connecticut or New Jersey alone. If we can't get the feds, we're going to have to start to talk to the other states and get them on board. And one of the things is talking about an ultra millionaires tax that does not go into the general fund, that goes into a COVID fund. I also think a bond, a COVID bond, again, designed to put money into COVID relief and not the general fund. Those are critical things to start to get some of the money in. Because what the problem that we have right now is we have things that we need to do. And if we don't get an immediate influx of money, then the ship is going to sink. And now we're stuck trying to rebuild the ship while it's already 20 feet underwater.
Let me thank you, Gary. We'll move the same question to Ed in terms of if they do get the money, where are we and what needs to be done? If we don't get the money, best case, worst case scenario that New York has to face. And I guess you have to prepare for the worst if you're in the legislature. So, what do you think needs to be done?
So we, first of all, in terms of the federal money, even if we do get, and I still think at some point we will get something. I don't think under the rosiest picture we're getting every dollar that we would need to make the state budget whole. One of the things that we've been trying to do within our conference, we've had conversations both with our members and with our Ways and Means staff, with Congressman Reed, who is the co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, who has basically not only worked across the aisle to try to bridge the gap and come up with something that'll work on both sides of the aisle, but also to be able to communicate, to the president's people, to Senator McConnell's people, the difference between our pre-COVID deficit, which we had in New York, which was fairly large, about $7 billion, and the revenue hole we're in as a result of it. Because I think some of the rhetoric out there was just, oh, New York and whatever other states you want to throw in there are just they're in a hole and they want DC to bail them out, and it's not about COVID. There is two pieces of this. So we do have some funding that has been, Medicaid funding that the governor has shifted over each year into the next fiscal year that causes a shortfall. Even with some of the money that we got in the CARES Act, the $5.1 billion, the education funding in there was used to supplant state support to education. That's over $1 billion in addition that immediately becomes a deficit into the next year. So, the governor said, and he's probably right, the ultimate solution is probably going to be a combination of three things. It's going to be some federal money, and how much that is obviously is going to greatly impact the other pieces. It's going to be some revenue, and whether that's things like tax increases that have been proposed or other kind of non-tax things, like, sports betting, things like that. And then it's going to be on the budget side and some type of budget cuts. I think some of the largest areas that we need to look at, we are very generous still with our Hollywood tax credit. That was continued and fully funded this year at about $420 million. We need to also look at, in the short term, the avenues that we have to try to weather those type of fiscal storms. We have a couple of rainy day type funds, reserve funds that we could utilize. The state budget this year did authorize short-term borrowing that the state has gone out on. And there's also some settlement money that could be utilized as well. So it's going to be a combination of a number of things that we're going to have to do to get things back in order. But just like, we looked at way back in 2008, 2009, the decisions we make are going to have a long-term impact, and we have to make sure we make decisions in the short term that are still sustainable in the long term. Otherwise, you're still just going to be kicking the can down the road in terms of that budget deficit.
In terms of the dollars that are out there, the governor has already said that if the money is not, if you don't receive all the money, that he would have to reduce aid to local government by 20%. The Suffolk County executive, Steve Bellone, said that this will be devastating cuts in effect to that'll defund police, public safety, public health, as well as teachers and other people. Well, our expert panel that we had last week, we had Mike Imber, we had Chris Wright from NIFA, we had Adam Haber who had been there, and Mike Imber had done a study, a Thornton report, a number of years ago for Nassau County, which he said virtually none of it was adopted. But he said he had created a list of want to have and need to have. And that's what you had to decide. And that seems to be the moment that we're in. So what then gets, what gets cut? What is out there that is there to be cut? We're looking at what they're saying is we're going to lose teachers, we're going to lose EMT, we're going to lose police, we're going to lose all those people. How do you cope with that, Ed? I'll start you off to answer.
So, and you're saying in terms of how do the local governments deal with it, or how do you deal with it on the state?
It's going to be local, and what do you do in terms of how you distribute aid?
So the aid picture in terms of the state versus the local government is really becoming more of a mess because before this last year there was a major change in a lot of the aid that comes down to local governments, and a lot of it was shifted on to the back of the county. Obviously, that is now an even bigger problem with the hole that the county's in. But basically all the aid to the villages and towns in Nassau County were shifted onto the back of the county last year. The long-term fiscal health of either of our counties on Long Island, as we all know, have been very rocky for a very long time. And to survive something like this just makes it that much more difficult, obviously. I think we need to, I don't think they're going to be able to count on, influxes of aid from the state, certainly. I don't think we should be, looking to do major, shifts of money onto their back. That's just going to make it more difficult. But it's recovering our businesses that are tremendously important for the counties, because sales tax revenue is, that mother's milk to our counties. And if our businesses locally aren't doing well and bringing in sales tax revenue, that's where the holes come from. That's why they're so in the hole. When you look at what was going on as everything was shut down, there's a reason why County Executive Curran kept saying to the governor, "We think we can operate Roosevelt Field safely. Please let us open," because I can't imagine what the impact of a major mall like that is on our sales tax revenue when it's closed for months. So I think certainly we have to continue to look for ways to help the local governments, and maybe we need to, in part, really get serious about some of the mandate relief. They've talked about different measures for years. We started to do some decent things in the past, but there are a lot of assistance that they're looking for. And when you can't give somebody aid in terms of money, if you can at the very least give them a little bit of flexibility with what they already have, I think that certainly helps.
Gary, I'll let you do it. I have a couple of ideas, most of which will be very unpopular, but right now there's no popular ideas that you could have when the state base is $14.5 billion. I think the Nassau County is losing $750 million over 18 months. There's no happy answers without a big influx of money. Gary, I'll let you answer the question that.
And that's where I start off with. We are basically getting into an apocalypse mode, and Nassau County, Suffolk County, it isn't just a matter of what we can do for them, because if we don't do the on a larger scale, the state, the region, whatnot, to get money in, then what's left to go is we're fighting over scraps. And so to answer your first question very directly, what gets cut? That's a very tough question. And someone's gonna have to answer that question if we get to the apocalypse. Now, the first thing I would say is that safety gets cut last. Safety is the most important thing, because if we don't have a safe county, then there's nothing to come back to. So that's the most important thing. Education has to come next, but then education is going to get paired. To give an example, my daughter Erica just got her degree as a music teacher. Well, she didn't even bother looking for work, because during the crisis, music teachers who got hired were told, our teachers who got hired were told not to go anywhere. Music teachers, don't worry about it. We're not hiring you. New hires weren't going. So the problem that we have is with the education, we're gonna have to then start looking at what goes first. Okay, art, music, extracurricular activities to maintain the core. We're gonna have to start shrinking into this apocalypse thinking if we don't get this additional money. I don't wanna cut social services. They have to be, those are also gonna be very tough, but they're gonna have to get pared down. It is an apocalypse mode. The question then is, can we get money in to forestall the apocalypse and spread things out?
So if you're in the apocalypse, let me throw out, and I'll let you both have the dubious honor of responding. One is consolidation of school districts. When Governor Cuomo first ran for government, he discussed all of the layers of government and municipalities, and he had a particular eye on Long Island, which you have Village of Great Neck has 9 villages. You have governments here. You have many villages. School districts. We have 56 school districts. Do we consider consolidating those districts? There's also the idea that New York City, as opposed to Nassau County, New York City, you self-inspect. Builders don't have to. Builders don't have to wait for the building department to give them approval to move ahead. It gets done after the fact. Is that going to be necessary to create jobs and development? I'll let Ed. I'll let you have the honor of starting off on those two ideas.
So as far as school consolidation, and this was talked about a lot when I was first running for the Assembly, in part because of what you said. Governor Cuomo, had championed consolidation and dissolution laws when he was AG, and studies that have been done on school consolidation have shown that it really didn't work in terms of saving money, because there were kind of winners and losers, and it kind of balanced out, and it really had to be a very particular circumstance to work. There have been a couple that have tried to merge, like out east, and they just haven't been able to find. I think they've tried multiple times, haven't found a way to make it work. The same with, I think we actually have seen more villages created than consolidated over the years. There, I think, obviously are always avenues to try to make things more, available to school districts. One of the things I've been saying for years, we have our BOCES program that provides really great programs that has been, in a lot of trouble over the years, and have had to cut back on those programs. And part of it is because of the way it's funded. It's kind of a, becomes a bean counting exercise for the local district, instead of it being a resource that kind of can provide equity and provide those types of programs that they provide, and make them available to a wider variety of districts. In terms of the other thing you said in terms of, self-certifying and things like, I think certainly we're going to have to get creative with making sure that, in terms of putting people to work, making sure that projects that are ready to go can go, and we don't want people caught up in red tape. I think that's very important for the economy, and it, obviously it has an impact on everything from sales tax on materials to wages to the workers, to getting the permanent jobs that come at the end of the line of a project being finished. So I think certainly that is going to be something that we need to look at with our local government, so that they can move projects forward.
Okay, Gary, same question.
Okay, well, let's take a look at some reality. I'm a small business owner, and I'm very conscious of what cost cutting has to do, about what you have to buy, what you have to get your money in, and how much you have to pay for stuff. And it really is just simple math. You take a look at the chancellor of the city of New York. What does he make? $150,000, and controls all the schools in New York. And yet here on the island, we have a district that'll have an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. And the superintendent is making, $300,000, maybe $350,000. And you've got the assistant superintendent, the deputy assistant superintendent. By the time you get all that layers gone, how much does the school spend? $1 million, $2 million? And then you replicate this across the island, just on superintendents alone and assistant superintendents, we can save millions of dollars. So consolidation, that would be a great idea. My concern with consolidation is that people on this island look upon their school district with a sense of almost religious awe. My school district is better than yours. I bought my house to get into this school district. My property taxes and my value of my house are a result of this school district. And if I consolidate with another school district, the value on my house is going to fall. That's a big concern with people. So while I think from a theoretical standpoint, consolidation can work, people just don't want to do it because of that, unless we change the structure of funding that won't affect the property values. But there are other things that we can do short of full consolidation, which people have been talking about for years, which is using BOCES to increase the back office type of consolidation, to get rid of repetitive administrative tasks that are in a lot of districts. And for God's sakes, we have got to put caps on superintendents, both the number of superintendents, the assistant superintendents, as well as their salaries. We have bidding wars. I remember in my district, every time the superintendent retires, there's a bidding war. Oh no, we've got to pay this amount. Otherwise we're going to lose this great superintendent. Really? My school district has an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. Why are we paying so much? Why are we in bidding wars over this stuff? It's insane.
What about the idea of self-certifying, having developers self-certify their work so that projects and consolidating? What about putting where I get the permit in one place? Now, this is something villages hold near and dear because they want to make up their own rules for doing it, but
You're talking about getting a state law to exempt and to create a new situation where you don't have to go running to God knows how many different agencies to get it. You're right. That sort of streamlining is a great idea. I think also what we need to do is look to other school districts in other states. You know, Northern Virginia does a really great job with their school districts. What are they doing so wonderful that we can't replicate here in Nassau County? I don't know. We need to look at other places.
let me ask you something about schools, because again, we're going to get now to school funding as part of that 20%. That represents a big number to the school districts. You're looking at teachers' jobs, program jobs. But one of the other things that's always existed, because of the reliance on property taxes, as opposed to an income tax, there's only one other country in the world that relies on property taxes to finance its schools. But we have created this situation, and people do say that their homes are valued, and I did move into this area because of this, but you guys are, the 19th district that you represent and that you're trying to represent. You have the, well, let's in or nearby, you have a Roslyn school district that spends $35,000. I don't think you guys go into Roslyn, but you're near. Spends $35,000 per pupil. You have Floral Park Belrose spending $21,600. You have Great Neck spending $34,000. You have Sewantica spending $24,000. Is that let's put aside COVID and say, does that make sense as a way of educating? We call it public school, but it's kind of, you would think that when you go to public school that all the public schools are alike, but they're very different in the programs that they have and the superintendents that they can afford. Is that something that makes sense? Or is that something that when you decide, if we're cutting back that 20%, do we exempt some places from the cutbacks and do it to the places that are the school districts that are spending at a much higher rate than the lower spending school districts? Ed, I'll let you start off on that.
Sure. So, you obviously in any given school district, you have your state aid side of things, and then you have, your local property tax side of things. And in some districts, that makes up the local share is the vast majority of things, and the state aid is a smaller portion. In other areas, that's reversed, especially as you go around the state. Theoretically, school aid funding from the state would be something that was targeted so as to kind of equalize those numbers you're talking about. And obviously, even within the district, there's some, unique lists, like you mentioned Floral Park Belrose, and you mentioned Sewantica. A lot of the districts within this assembly district are, K through 12, but then, the district that I live in here in Franklin Square, you have the 4 grade school districts and you have the high school district. And, those numbers were fairly comparable from the Floral Park Belrose to Sewantica High School District, which they're a component of, but it makes it at times hard to, compare apples to apples. But I think that the formula in terms of aid has an impact on that. And I think also, you know, the tax cap, when it came in, I think kind of froze some of those numbers in place where they were, because now your ability locally, you know, is limited by that number, you know, up to 2%, but most of the time less. And you're more reliant on things like the foundation aid that's coming from the state that has never been fully phased in and is not really properly adjusted for what the costs are on Long Island. I always say one of the places that it is counterintuitive, but there were places in the state that were well over 100% phased in on foundation aid, and there were places like Westbury that was way down, nowhere close to where they should have been. And that's counterintuitive when you look at it was one of the few districts that's growing in population, and obviously is a district with great need. So ideally, state aid should be something that equalizes that. Now with property taxes, you're never truly going to get it to an equal level, and I think there is some level of local control where the local voters are deciding what they want to invest in their local districts.
Should we get rid of the tax cap, at least in some districts? The poor districts, basically, once you froze that, there was no way that they could catch up, even if they wanted to. It's not to say that the voters would want to go over 2%, but even if they wanted to, you have to get 60% of the vote as opposed to 50%. Should they be allowed to do that?
I don't think it's so much about getting rid of the tax cap as it is adjusting it to some realities and certainly dealing with the mandate side. The governor has been very, very reluctant and really against some of the exemptions that are needed there. Like you look at over the years, there are districts that have been greatly impacted by the fact that pilots have been granted there, and then they don't get accounted for properly in that, and then that hurts their ability under it. So I think we need to reflect some of those realities. I think that would help with the cap number, but also the state. The weird situation that we have as a state is that, the legislature and the governor deal with the aid side of it, but the Board of Regents deals with really the policy side of things. Now, I think it's a good thing that in some respects is supposed to keep the politics out of the school policy, but you end up with policies that have major price tags that get passed by the Board of Regents without the consideration of whether the state's going to provide the funding for it. So
let me move this question to Gary, because I don't want to, we could be here for a long time, and I pegged it for everyone for an hour and a half. Gary, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, unlike my opponent, I've actually had experience with the public school system because I pushed 4 kids through it. My oldest is, by the way, give a shout out to the West Hempstead School District. My daughter, Sarah, who's a NASA scientist. My son, Sam, who got a full scholarship to Temple University and went to become an Army officer, and now he's a graduate student at the new school. My daughter, Erica, who just graduated from New Paltz, and my son, Ben, who just started the University of New Haven. So you didn't mention West Hempstead in that, but we're on the lower end, and I recognize that. And throwing money at a school doesn't necessarily make it a better education. As I said, my oldest, she's a planetary scientist working at NASA, so that doesn't mean much. But when you cut the numbers too low, what ends up happening is quality does suffer. And what we end up having, at least particularly on Long Island, is we've created an economic class structure with regard to education. As you pointed out, property tax is regressive. And this is a big problem that we have on the island. Because property tax is regressive, it ends up forcing out our older residents who are on fixed incomes. It creates problems for our newer residents who are trying to buy in. And as a result, we have a massive influx of illegal tenants as people use the illegal tenants to help offset the increased property value. And because Ed Mangano played magic for 8 years, basically burned down the house, and now Laura Gillen is trying to put the fire out and build it at the same. Laura Kern. Yeah, is trying to burn. Laura Kern is trying to put out the fire and rebuild the house at the same time. She had to basically push through restructuring of the assessment, and those taxes are going to go up again. The property taxes are regressive. They are ridiculous. But again, there's an emotional thing on this island. If you say the word income tax, people start getting all panicky. I don't think income tax should be something to be afraid of, but I don't think it's something that has to be pushed down by the legislature either. I think the people in Nassau County have got to talk about this and come to a consensus and then tell their representatives this is what they want. I don't think, and as a representative, I wouldn't want to push down what I think my constituents don't want, even if I think it may be a good idea. But the regressive tax structure has got to get changed. And again, it will have a beneficial effect getting rid of the illegal tenancies. I mean, when you talk to people who have moved out of the county and they move to another state and they tell you, oh, I'm only paying $2,000 a year on my property tax, you're blown away. Like, how could that be? I'm paying $12,000 on my house and your house is about 3 times the size of my house.
So let me ask you this, because some of this, when we talk about the disparity, in a number of cases, we're talking about race. So there's been a lot of discussion about, with the Black Lives Matter, about reform. What is do you believe that there is systemic racism in this country? Certainly you're on Long Island that has, which is, Nassau County is one of the most segregated counties of its size in the United States. Do you think there is systemic racism here? Do you think, and what do you think of the Black Lives Matter for equity in policing? And they say that there's a policing problem that's in need of reform, as well as other economic. I'll let you start off, and then we'll have Ed comment.
Well, my degree's in history and my hobby is reading 19th century history. So let me make it really clear. Racism is not a flaw in our system. Unfortunately, it was baked in from the very beginning. At 1620, when we first stole the first African from the shores of his home to bring him here to work as a slave, it has been part of our economic structure. And if you ever watched the movie 1776, there's a great song explaining the triangle: molasses to rum to slaves. And then it moved into cotton. The initial economic structure of this country, when you talk about molasses to rum to slaves, that covered all the regions of the New World. And then when we got into cotton, the Yankees were into it as well, the Yankee factories. We built this country, unfortunately, on racism. It is not going
to account. And so, okay, do you think it continues to this day? And what about in Nassau County?
Well, I think the biggest surprise of that Newsday article about redlining is that no one was really surprised. It was our dirty little secret, because when you walk around your neighborhoods, you notice this stuff. And we all know, if you're a white person, oh, you don't go to Roosevelt, you don't go to Uniondale. Those people are there. And the people in Roosevelt and Uniondale, they know, don't go into Garden City after dark because the cop's going to stop you. What was that Stanford report that showed that when you wait for population, Black people are 43% more likely to be stopped by cops than white people? Just stops. We're not talking about the shootings, which is 2.5% more on the shootings. It's horrific. Black Lives Matter is an important moment in this country. And it isn't just that Black Lives matter, but Black lives should matter. America has always been divided, and white America, we have ignored this all the time. Do you know that Billie Holiday wrote a song about lynching called Strange Fruit? You probably don't. And you don't know that Hoover was so furious at her for writing that and singing that song that he went after her. You can catch it on YouTube. It is a horrific song about lynching that President Truman tried repeatedly when he was in the Senate to get an anti-lynching law passed, and it never happened. He was horrified as a president that Black servicemen coming back from World War II were being lynched, and he couldn't get any traction because he was being, the Southern Democrats, unfortunately Democrats, were filibustering in Congress. So he ended up trying to push through what he could push through. You know that until 1970, Black people couldn't get mortgages. This is absurd. This is outrageous. And these things still continue to this day. It is a moral cancer that we must cut out, absolutely cut out from our society.
So let me ask Ed, similar question about racism and particularly with policing, because you've been very you've been supportive of police, the effort, I guess, what is it called? The Blue campaign. Do you think that there is systemic racism? Do you think that Black people, do you think that there's a need for police reform in Nassau County? And do you think there are other things about racism that still exist in Nassau County?
Sure. So as far as you know, the police and police reform, look, I am a supporter of the police. I won't in any way you know, say that I'm not, nor will I apologize for that. I think we need to show the men and women in law enforcement that they have our support. When you look at some of what has gone on recently, and you know, in terms of people being, you know, assaulted, anti-cop graffiti, and things of that nature. I think when you talk about reform, reform has to be done in a deliberative and a collaborative way. I think that we do have a police department in Nassau County that does have good relations with our community. I think that, you know, we had, you know, an issue a few years ago where we started losing some of those police that were assigned for the, you know, to address those specific issues within communities. Thankfully, you know, the POP units have been restored. They go to civic meetings on a regular basis. They form relationships with local groups. And I think that's important. I think that, you know, reforms that kind of become a, you know, we need to be, you know, one group versus another. I don't think that's how you get real reform. I think you have to have both sides of an issue come together and discuss the needs. And, you know, when we had these, you know, the series of bills, you know, that were passed in Albany, and it's, you know, it's funny, some of them are going to get, you know, obviously more attention than others, but really a lot of them passed almost unanimously, things that were really, you know, we thought designed to help, you know, improve relationships and things, to adopt some reforms. And then there were others that were more controversial because, you know, many of us felt that they were going to make it more difficult for police officers to do their jobs. They were going to make them and their families a target and make their jobs more dangerous. So I think that we also have to certainly recognize in Nassau County, just like in Suffolk, we do have a lot of, you know, New York City police officers that live amongst us that are our neighbors. And, you know, they have seen, you know, I would say a different situation with regard to public safety in recent months than maybe we have here in Nassau.
Do you think Blacks are treated differently than whites by the police in Nassau County? Are you more likely to be stopped by the police if you're Black than if you're white? Is there a different experience for Blacks versus whites in dealing with police?
Look, I can't, you know, speak for, you know, what experience, you know, an African-American individual has, you know, in Nassau County. I do think that our police department does an excellent job. I think they do that regardless of race, color, creed, religion, in terms of addressing issues in our community. So I think they do an excellent job. I think that, you know, like I said, bringing people together to talk about issues is important. I think that police departments have, you know, worked to do more training on things like implicit bias, and I think that it is something that, you know, continues to be an issue that when we train our officers and we think about different techniques, de-escalation, all those types of things, it's important that we collaborate with them. When we pass laws that make it more difficult to do the jobs without, you know, recognizing certain realities within when you're in that life or death situation, I don't think it's productive.
Do you think that that police should have liability if they do illegal acts as a police officer? Right now, there's limited liability for them in being sued. If you're a surgeon, you can be sued for if you do something wrong outside of that, but police seem to have more protection than, say, a doctor. Do you think that would be helpful in eliminating, to preventing people from, they would face stiffer consequences for misbehavior?
I think that, you know, there's a reason why there is some limits to liability. And that's that, you know, these situations when something happens that escalates into violence are split-second decisions that people need to make. And sometimes they end very, very, you know, run-of-the-mill, nothing happens. And we don't really hear about those. Sometimes they unfortunately end in tragedy, and it's appropriate at that point that, you know, investigations are done both internally within the departments and by DA's offices where appropriate to decide whether, you know, a prosecution has to take place. So I think there are people that have faced you know, very stiff penalties. You know, where, like, I mean, if you look at despite a lot of the talk about, you know, the Garner case on Staten Island, the officer lost his job, lost his pension. And we have, because there were some questions in terms of, you know, what was appropriate use of force. The state did, which, like I said, was overwhelmingly passed, did make some changes to the law with regard to chokeholds. So I think I think that there is a reason why there is a little bit of liability protection, because you're facing a life or death situation.
Gary, you want to answer the same questions in terms of, you're a lawyer, talk about the liability and.
All right, let's, okay. There's two aspects to liability, and my opponent made a comment that the police officer that killed Gardner lost his pension. Gardner lost his life. Part of the problem that we have, and this is going into my military background. In the military, we don't have a code of silence. We have a structure that if someone commits a crime in the military, it's reported by other military people. The military people prosecute them. The military people will put them in jail. And we have a real prison in the military. In the Army, it's at Fort Leavenworth. It's a real, honest-to-God prison. So if you take a look at the war crimes cases that have come up in the last few years, how did we find out about it? Because people in the unit who saw the war crimes reported it back. We had no code of silence. In the military, and we fall down, we're human just like everyone else, but in the military, well, we have a sense of respect. If you do not toe the line, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, if you don't show that proper military correctness and dignity and respect the soldier values, then we're going after you. We're going to, if you committed a crime, we're going to send you to jail. If you didn't commit a crime, but you're still not towing the line, we'll just kick you out. The problem with the police forces across this country is they don't have that attitude. They have an attitude of us versus them. And therefore they have this code of silence that, well, we got to protect the bad cop, because if we don't protect the bad cop, all the other cops are going to be hurt. They need to get the military mentality. They need to have an attitude such that, like the Marines have, the good, the proud, the few, the Marines, and I hate to say this because I'm Army, but they have a really good ethos. And if the police departments can try to get that Marine ethos, then a lot of these problems will disappear, because cops know that they can get away with stuff because, hey, if you talk against me, not only the code of silence, but you're going to be sent out into the cold. I mean, take a look what happened to Frank Serpico. Frank Serpico tried to talk about all the corruption that was going on, and he was doing the right thing, and he ended up getting very badly injured. And then we had the Knapp Commission come in, which tried to get rid of some of the corruption. I will say the New York City Police Department did a really good job of getting rid of that type of corruption and becoming more professional. When I was a DA in Brooklyn, the cops that I came across would never take a bribe. The cops I came across when I was a DA in Brooklyn were personally honest and had a great deal of integrity. And it's because the society of the police force changed from the Knapp Commission in the 1970s to when I was a DA in the 1990s. So that change can occur. Our police can take that military ethos that if you are not towing the standard, if you're not being the standard.
What about legal liability? Should they face?
I'm concerned about that. That one does trouble me, and I will say I am troubled by that one. Police do get into some very tough situations, and while I do want a police officer like,
So do they, I mean, Marines get into tough situations, and
but they don't get
members of
personally
the Army get into tough
They
situations.
don't get personally sued, but they can go to jail. Okay, so yes, in that situation, they know that if they don't do the right thing, they can be prosecuted. To add that second step of liability, I don't know. I'll be perfectly honest with you, Steve. I am very ambivalent on that topic at this point. I don't know whether or not I would go one way or the other on it.
Okay, we also had bail reform, which again, this is another subject that touches very much with race in terms of reforms. Ed, you were a critic, a vocal critic of the bail reform that was passed at the beginning of the year. That reform that was approved was then, I guess in April, it was modified to make it allow for more cases, give judges greater discretion. It was addressing a problem where, and what we're talking about is cashless bail, where 72% of those incarcerated were there because they could not afford to post bail for the arraignment. And you had 40% of the people in Rikers who had mental illness. So where do you see now, you touched on bail reform as an issue. What is your opinion now of the laws regarding bail in this state?
So, as you know, we had that forum back in, I guess, was that February or March? Seems like a lifetime ago, but I know it was right before everything shut down.
We did it in person.
Yes, in person. And I think that some of the changes that were made in this year's budget were positive. I don't believe they really gave judges discretion in terms of actually evaluating the defendant in front of them as much as we didn't increase the number of crimes for which somebody could be held on bail. I think that some of the low-hanging fruit was addressed in doing so, but not all of it. For instance, one of the things I've talked about often was I introduced the first bill of anybody in the state that involved any rollback of the bail reform, which was about narcotics offenses, the A1 and A2 felonies of possession and sale of narcotics, things like fentanyl that people are, lacing with heroin and causing all kinds of overdoses. And I went to a forum with DA Singas and the special narcotics prosecutor from New York City just a few weeks after the bail reforms were passed, and she expressed concerns that those not being bail eligible were going to be a huge issue in prosecuting, major drug rings. So we added back in the A1s, not the A2s.
Let me stop you just for a moment and ask you, did you think that there needed to be reform when they passed the legislation? Let's set aside for a moment what they actually did, but was there a need for significant reform?
I think there was a need for reform, but again, I don't agree with the way we went about it. And unfortunately, because it was part of the budget, the governor proposed a bail reform law when he presented the budget in January of 2019. Bail reform was passed in that budget, but the way it was gone about in that final budget bill, which that language only saw the light of day for a few hours before it was passed into law, was completely different than what the governor had proposed. So, you go through hearings and take input on what the governor is saying, which had some issues. and then at the end of the day, you end up with something completely different. The governor did actually have much more judicial discretion. He had the ability for a judge really to evaluate what was going on in front of him, do some type of finding on the record, whether there were concerns about the flight of the defendant, whether there were concerns about a danger to public safety of the defendant. And I think that's still what is lacking in the product we have, because what we did was, we added in or added back in some crimes, but we really didn't address that part.
All right, Gary, what's your
Okay,
bail reform needed? When it came out, was it okay? Have they fixed it?
okay. Well, first off,
there's more need to be done.
Well, first off, unlike my opponent, I was actually a prosecutor. I was a DA in Brooklyn during the crack crisis, when we had 2,200 homicides a year in the city. I was personally running, when I was a line DA, about 300 cases at any given time. Actually, I was in the same bureau with Kathleen Rice. It was insane. And what really bothers me about the whole discussion about bail reform is the inherent dishonesty going on in a lot of the discussion. Oh, I keep hearing from the people against it. If the bail reform means we're just putting criminals on the streets, revolving door. Let me be very clear what bail is and what bail is not. Bail is to hold a person over for trial if you believe that person will not show up in court. We have a system in this country called innocent until proven guilty. And the idea of preventive detention is basically this, Steve. I don't know if you're going to commit a crime in the future. I think you're going to. I don't know what crime it is you're going to commit, but I think you're going to commit that crime. I don't know when, where, or how, but I think you're going to do it. So I want to put you in jail while I hold you over for the crime that I've charged you on. And now you get held for 2 years and you get acquitted on that charge, but you've been in jail for 2 years because you're a danger to the community for basically Minority Report, that Tom Cruise movie. Bail is about holding someone over. Now, when you look at it from that perspective, now I'm going to tell you some unfortunate inside baseball that prosecutors are told. You're told as a prosecutor, get bail, because when a person gets bail and he's more likely going to plead guilty. So let me tell you how it works. Guy gets picked up. Let's say gets picked up for an E felony. They plead it down to an A misdemeanor. He's in jail. You put bail on him. He can't make it because he doesn't have the money for it. He now goes in jail for 30 days. He loses his job. When he comes back out, you offer him an A misdemeanor and you offer him 180 days. He says no. He goes back in for another 30 days. Now he's in for 60 days. Definitely lost his job. He's lost his apartment. He comes out after 60 days and you say, look, I'll offer you an A in 120 days. He says no. He goes back in. Now he's in for 90 days. He comes out. You offer him an A in 90 days. Time served. He walks out. Now he's got a conviction on his record for a misdemeanor. With the felonies, it's a similar situation. With a felony, we have a higher bail, and it takes longer for them to get to court. And
So Gary, let me ask you this. That was addressed. Do you think, are you satisfied with where it is now? Because right now, Ed thinks that there should be still some more changes. Do you think the changes went too far, or do you think now they've got it right?
The only thing that I would like, and this is only because I'm a lawyer that practices in front of judges a lot, I don't like statutes that lock a judge in too tightly. Okay, I would like to see a little more discretion with the judges, and I think there's ways to do that without opening the door to judges who may completely ignore what's going on because they have their own predilection. Because you can make additional changes to the discretion by adding into the statute, the judge shall or may consider the following factors and add those in as well. I am concerned, again, about the loss. The original bill, I loved a lot of it, but the loss of judicial discretion as an attorney got me very concerned. Because again, at the end of the day, you want to have that living person looking at the statute and giving some breathing room to adjust for certain circumstances based upon things that a legislator cannot conceive as they're up there in Albany trying to pass the law.
Okay. We're going to wrap up shortly. I've got one final question, and then I'll let both of you guys make your closing arguments on why the voters should vote for you. My question is, before that, is how comfortable are you with voting um, in Nassau County in terms of having a fair election and getting the results in a timely way. We had primaries in June, and we didn't get the results for weeks or months. We've also had, we know nationally, there's efforts to dissuade people, and then there's the danger of COVID. So how comfortable are both of you that we'll have fair elections and that people will be able to vote safely this fall in November? Ed, you wanna answer that first?
Sure. I'm very comfortable that people are going to be able to vote safely in Nassau County. We have 10 days of early voting, which started last year, which I think is going to give people the opportunity to get out early and be able to do so. And the nice thing about that is you can go, whether there's one site closest to your home or close to where you work, and you can go, they'll print you your ballot and you can vote. There's obviously polling on election day, and I think that it's safe to go out and do that. And a lot of people are taking advantage of absentee voting, and we've made it a qualifying excuse that you have a fear of COVID. So anybody is able to request an absentee ballot. People are doing that. We're getting a record number of absentee ballot requests in Nassau County. So people do have all those options. Now, is it going to maybe cause counting to take a little more time with the volume of absentees? It might, but I think one of the advantages we have over the primary, even though the volume is bigger, is there was also a change in the law in terms of letting the ballots get sent out, come in earlier. People are able to submit them earlier. And obviously, there's been investments in the technology that is able to rapidly scan absentee ballots and tabulate them, which is something that in the past had been done by hand. So it will delay the results a little bit, especially in close races. But I'm confident that people in Nassau County are going to have the opportunity to vote safely, and many of them already are doing so by absentee.
And if you lose, will you leave office?
Yes, I'll leave a key for Mr. Port at the front desk of the.
Gary, on the same question.
I think the Nassau County Board of Election people are great. In fact, during the presidential primary, I actually screwed up my ballot. I forgot to sign across the envelope, so they mailed it back to me, and I was able to get it back in time. So, my advice to people, if you're going to do it by mail, do it early, because we have great BOE people, and if you do mess it up, they will catch it and get it back to you if it gets there in time. I have the utmost confidence in our Nassau County folks. I think it'll be fine. The early balloting, which they had started, I think, was it last election cycle or the cycle before that, went exceptionally well. I deliberately went on the first day just to see how it worked, and I was very impressed in how it worked. Our folks, Democrat and Republican, who manned the polls, great people. I can't say enough great things about them. A lot of dedicated folks. I have no doubt that while it may get a little delayed, I don't think there's going to be any real issues.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you guys then make your closing statements on why voters should select you over your opponent. We'll start with Gary as the challenger, and we'll let Ed close out.
Okay, thank you. Well, what I've pointed out is that the Republicans are in a time warp. They're acting as if it's still December 2019. And I keep telling, and I've been saying all night, we are on the brink of an apocalypse. We can't just act as if nothing is going wrong. We have to act dramatically. We have to act boldly. We have to act with courage. And, Mr. Raw this night, he's talking about a lot of the same stuff that sounds great in December 2019, but doesn't sound great now. Times have changed. We have to move forward. The other thing is, yes, there is a supermajority in the Assembly. I believe it's like 102, 103 Democrats, something like 40 Republicans. The Republicans really don't have much of a voice. what really is going on there is it's regional. You've got Long Island, New York City, upstate, and Western New York. I'm originally from New York City. I came to Long Island 26 years ago. I understand the New York City mentality. I understand the Long Island mentality. As a Army officer and a divorce lawyer, I understand about planning and making consensus. As a divorce lawyer, I get people who hate each other to settle cases. I mean, we get people who are so off base that, you know, one of them is saying Ohio and the other one is saying spaghetti. And you're like, how are we going to get these folks together? But I do, because that's my job as a divorce lawyer. As an Army officer, it's all project and task related. What am I trying to do? How do I get there? And then building the consensus. Actually, the Army at the level that I worked at the very high levels, colonels and generals. It's about building consensus and working together, not about just trying to get people to listen to what you're telling them and do what you're supposed to do. You've got to build consensus. And sometimes in the Army, it is like herding cats. And the Democrats, we are a fractious bunch. And there's no question about building consensus within that Democratic council, where you've got basically the Democrats running the assembly. You need someone who's a Democrat who can talk the language of the other Democrats and try to bring them together, because in the end, Nassau County has very different goals than New York City, but we both have got to go to Albany and work together to do what's right for our communities. And Western New York is a totally different environment. It's farmland. It's like Kentucky. It's not like the farms of Suffolk, and it's definitely not like where I grew up in Brooklyn. Totally different environments, and they're different people. But getting together and working on that. And again, understanding that there's something important. Now, we have this economic crisis, and we can't just ignore it, close our eyes, and wish really, really hard. And one more thing, veterans. My pet project is I want to get a statewide veterans treatment court going. In 2017, the GAO, Governor Accounting Office, found that 62% of all service members who had been discharged from misconduct had been previously diagnosed with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress syndrome. New York does not have a unified court system to deal with veterans' issues. If a veteran gets arrested for a DWI or a violent crime or in Albany, he will get a different treatment than if he's in Suffolk or if he's in Erie County. We need one system with mentors and social workers to help the veterans who went to war, got broke, and no one is doing anything for them. So that would be my pet project.
Thank you. Ed, you have the closing remarks.
Right. Thank you to Mr. Blank. Thank you to Mr. Port. You know, I've spent the last 10 years in the state assembly, and over that time, I would say I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of historic legislation, and I've seen you know, the Senate change from Republican to having an independent Democratic caucus and kind of a coalition government, and now to single party government. And one of the things that I'm seeing now is that the state assembly is moving further and further to the left. There's a group of Democratic socialists who just won a bunch of primaries who are coming in and ready to you know, tear the place to the ground. And I think that, you know, we need people on both sides of the aisle to have some balance, but I think we need people to be willing to work with both sides of the aisle as well. Over the time I've been there, I've developed many relationships on the other side of the aisle. I feel I'm deeply respected on the other side of the aisle, and I've had the opportunity for the last couple of years prior to this year to serve as our assistant floor leader, which required me to prepare for debates on many different issues, including many of the historic pieces of legislation that were passed last year, and have conversations with my Democratic colleagues about, you know, who were from other parts of the state, about how something they were proposing might impact us on Long Island, and make suggestions. Many of times they're able to take that input and they do make some adjustments to their bills. So I think at the end of the day, my experience in the legislature, as we get into a very difficult few years ahead of us from a budget perspective, there's no question about it. Even, like I said, under the rosiest forecast, if the federal government comes in with help, it's still not going to be enough to fully make us whole. And we're going to have to make those difficult decisions. And we're going to have to finally be smarter about how we spend our money. We're going to have to, instead of, wasting money on these major economic development projects and Hollywood tax credits, we're going to have to focus on our local businesses, help them get back on their feet, help them generate the sales tax revenue that is going to put our counties back on solid fiscal ground. And we need to do it collaboratively. We can't do it as a single party just saying we're in charge now and we're going to do what we want, which is something I saw way too much of as the legislature changed. And at the end of the day, my vote, when I vote on a bill in the legislature, is going to be the vote of the communities I represent. I have supported, a number of things. It's not uncommon for me to be one of maybe a handful of Republicans to support a bill because I think it's the right thing, whether it's on the environment or things like, the Child Victims Act, the LLC loophole that I was voting for before the legislature flipped. So I'm asking people for their support, whether it's on November 3rd during early voting or whether their ballot is sitting with them at home right now, ready to go in. And again, I thank you for hosting this forum.
Well, I want to thank both candidates for obeying the rules and not requiring me to cut off their mics and providing us with a level of discussion that perhaps some of the national candidates might model. So I want to thank you for a very good discussion, a lot of good information, and thank you very much for taking the time. This is produced, again, I'm Steve Blank with Blank Slate Media. I want to thank our sponsor of the event, which is Northwell Health. You'll also be able to, or you can tell your friends. You can see this on Facebook, YouTube. We will have a link on our website, and we hope that North Shore Television will also broadcast this. Thank you, gentlemen, for a very good discussion. Thank you for those in our audience for attending, and thank you for all participating, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Steve. Go Army, beat Navy.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll agree on that one.
Okay. Here we got unity here.